Okay, so now when the user is logged in, we're going to have this display sign out. So in order to do that, if we go back to our navbar and we scroll down to see this button, we're no longer going to want to call the submit modal button here because we don't always want to load a modal. We only want to load the modal when they want to log in or something else. So we are going to create another function up here called determine modal button action. Then we're going to have another variable called user here that we're going to keep track of. And we're going to say if user, then this means we are signed in. Else, we are not signed in. So we will call set modal. With the state of login. So then we'll call determine modal button action instead. So we're no longer going to want to use this data target login modal because we don't always want to call login modal. Instead, we're going to set on click equal to determine modal button action. Okay, so now when the user signed in, we're going to make this say sign out instead of login. So in order for that to happen, our navbar will have to know or have access to the user variable. So we're going to make that global and we're going to call it user. And then we're just going to grab these three things and organize this a bit better by putting them at the top. That way we have all the functions below the global variables. Okay, so now if we go back to our navbar, we're going to notice we have this login button. So we are not always going to want to have it say login, obviously, so we'll change that. But we're going to change the button ID to be login button. Even though it's not always going to be logging in, we really can just name it login button to make it easier. So we no longer want to data target the login modal. We no longer want the modal to spawn when we click the button because if they're signing out, for example, we wouldn't want to load the modal. So we only want to do it a certain amount of times. So we're going to add an on click instead. That happens when you click the button. And that is going to equal a new function that we are going to create called determine login button action. So we're going to say if user does not equal null, then sign out. Else, we're going to sign in. So in order to sign in, basically what we're going to do is we are going to programmatically cause the modal to open. So this is really easy to do. But remember, we do want to set modal to login by default if we know this is the case, which means we can just delete it from here. And then we're going to use jQuery to cause our login modal. How do we spell that? Was there a dash? Login modal. Dot modal to show. Then we need to make sure that we call determine login button action in our on click on this button. On click equals. Okay, so then if we refresh our page, user is going to be null, so it's going to load our login. So now what we need to do is determine when user is not null. So we're going to have another function called user sent from auth, and then user logged in will be sent. And then we're just going to do user equals user logged in. And then if we go back to our Firestore, we are going to create a function that Firestore has. It's going to be called firebase.auth.onAuth state changed. function user logged in. Make sure this is all good. So this is going to be called whenever somebody logs in or somebody logs out. So we're going to say user equals user logged in. And then we are going to call our navbar and also send this our user. So user send from auth. We're going to send them user. So now whenever we log in or log out, this will trigger, which will call this function in our navbar. So our navbar will always know whether somebody's logged in or not. And now if somebody is logged in, so if user does not equal null, else. So if user does not equal null, then that means there is somebody logged in. So we are going to set login button text login button dot text equals sign out, else login button dot text equals sign in. So now if we refresh our page, it will automatically come up saying sign out. And you might be wondering, why is it doing that? Ever since we've refreshed our page, we haven't logged in. Well, the way Firebase handles this is really cool. So it actually, even if we refresh the page, we'll know if we're logged in or not. So if I click sign out, well, it's not actually going to do anything because we haven't set it up to do anything yet. So determine login action, this will call. We're just going to make sure by console.logging, we should now be signing out. If I refresh the page and click sign out, it'll say we should now be signing out. Okay, so now we need to make a sign out function in Firestore. Luckily, this is pretty simple. You just have to type exactly what I have here. So we're going to call it sign out. And then we're going to type firebase.auth.sign out. And then in navbar, we're going to call sign out. Okay, so it automatically signs us out and goes back to sign in. Then if we click it again, it'll bring in our login state. So now we actually have a complete system going where we can sign in. I can type in my password, log in. It's good. We have our user. It's not displaying anywhere, but it does change this to sign out. So now that we know that we're signed in. So now when we start creating new posts, we have to make sure that we're signed in. And we want to use our display name instead of just the one that we hard coded in there. So that's what we're going to be jumping onto next. Luckily, this is super easy. We're just going to go back to Firestore. We want to find the part where we have add post to DB. And we're just going to set post.displayname equals user.displayname. So then if we refresh, I'm going to make a new account called tim@brilliantlabs.ca. Our password is just going to be password. Oh, whoops. And I'm going to set my display name to be Tim. And then I'm going to click sign up. Okay. So now we automatically get logged in, by the way, by Firestore. We don't have to log in after we've signed up. Now if I create new post by Tim and I click create post, it does it. So it gets our display name from how we've logged in and it sets it here. Let's double check that it's doing that in Firebase too by clicking database. We'll just wait for it to load. Then we'll look through our posts and we see display name is Tim. So now we have the user authentication working properly. So the next thing we're going to move on to is the likes and the comments.